So we're going to continue on with our subject matter, which is the clear statement, which is the obligatory knowledge, explaining what every accountable Muslim is obligated to know, that it is not permissible for that Muslim to neglect learning. We're on page 44 if you have the book. The author said, if an inhibitive matter prevents the prayer from being an obligation on a person, such as menses, postpartum bleeding, insanity, or fainting occurs after sufficient time to only perform the prayer has passed since the setting in of the prayer time, then they must make up that missed prayer, provided that they have the latitude religiously to perform purification before the setting in of the prayer's time. So here, this case that we're talking about is there's certain scenarios that can occur to a human, to a Muslim, that would prevent him from being able to pray. The most commonly known one is the menstruation for the woman or becoming insane. Some people, they go in and out of sanity. Certain things make them go insane. And when that happens, then they're not accountable. So when we say inhibitive matter, we say something that makes the prayer not valid, or the person would not be able to do the prayer while they're in that state. So we'll go with the example of the woman on her period, I think because it's the easiest one to understand. So if a woman gets her period, and let's say the Lord is in, she can't pray Lord now. So the Lord already entered, and then she got her period. Now she can't pray because she's on her period. She has to, go through it, and then after it's done, she takes an obligatory ghusl, and then, she can pray again, and she can fast. However long her period lasts. But then the question is, what is the judgment of that dhuhr that she wasn't able to pray because she got her period? So the answer to that question is based on how much time passed since the dhuhr was in and when she got her period. So the normal case, or the common case, is if enough time passed from the time of dhuhr that is enough for her to perform the minimum amount of the prayer, just enough for the prayer to be valid, then that means when she gets off of her period, she is obligated to make it up. So the woman who gets her period while the prayer time is in, she checks, this time that passed until I got my period, is that time enough for me to pray? The prayer, the minimum amount of the prayer? If the answer is yes, then when she gets off of her period, she has to pray that prayer. Now, when we say the normal case, or when we say the case that usually happens, we say that because this is the case of the one who he is able to, according to the Islamic law, the one who is able to, according to the Islamic law, the one who is able to make wudu, or do his purification before the prayer time is in. So what does that mean? That means that, like you and me, for example, we can make wudu before the prayer time starts. So we can make wudu, let's say at 10 a.m., and we can keep it all the way until 2 p.m., and we can pray dhuhr at 2 p.m. with the wudu that we kept since 10 a.m., for example. That's the normal case. So that's why the time that's considered after the prayer time is in, that passes until the person, let's say, until she gets her period, or until the person goes insane, for example, that time that we check is the time that's enough to do the prayer. If a time that is not enough to do the prayer passes, and then the woman gets her period, or the man goes insane, then they don't have to pray that prayer. So that's the normal case. That's the case when the individual he is able to make wudu or his purification before the prayer time is in, like us. There's a special situation where if a person, they have a certain disease or sickness, they have something wrong with their body that causes them to constantly be in a state of ritual impurity. What does that mean? For example, they constantly have urine dripping out of them. It's just, the urine keeps coming out. So obviously that's a tough situation, a difficult situation. It is a sickness, may Allah Ta'ala protect us from such a thing. But it is a calamity. But in that case, that person, because they have that special situation, they are not able to make wudu before the prayer time is in. They have to wait until they're sure that the time is in, and then once they're sure, then they have to do a special process, which is they have to clean themselves, and then they have to stuff that place, and quote unquote stuff that place with something that will keep it as clean as possible, so like cotton or tissues, etc. And then they do the type of purification that would be any further situation, because they actually won't be lifting the ritual impurity. They're just doing this to make it valid for them to pray. So they do like the actions of wudu, but with the intention of making the prayer valid. And then immediately after they finish doing that, they enter into the prayer. They don't do like us, where after we make wudu, let's say, we can hang out for 15 minutes and chill, and then we can pray. The one who has that situation where urine is constantly dripping out of him, for example, that one, he has to do these things, and in this special process, he has to wait until the prayer time is in, then he has to clean himself, he has to stuff the area, then he has to do the purification and to make the prayer valid, then immediately he has to enter into the prayer. He has to occupy himself with the prayer. So for that person, if the prayer time comes in and something happens to them that doesn't allow them to pray, like going insane or the woman getting her period, then here we check how much time passed, which is the time to do the prayer and the time to do that process. So that's the only difference between the two situations, and that's what the author meant when he said that. So that's the first case, and when we say that the amount of time that passed is enough for the person to do the prayer, and that's in the normal case. But in the case where religiously they have to wait until the prayer time is in to do that process, then that time is also taken into consideration. Then the author said, or if an inhibitive matter occurs after sufficient time to perform the prayer and its purification has passed, given the person is not permitted to perform purification before the setting in of the prayer's time, like the case of the one afflicted with a matter such as incontinence of urine or istihaba, then one must also make up that this prayer when the inhibitive matter terminates. So, the synopsis of the case is, if the prayer time comes in and then something happens to the person that prevents them from being able to pray, like going insane, like losing your mind, or like the woman getting her period, then that prayer that happened in, do they have to pray after that thing leaves them, after they are now able to pray again? The answer is based on how much time passed. If they are a normal person, then the time that we check is, did enough time pass for them to do the minimum of the prayer? If the answer is yes, then they have to make it up. If the answer is no, they don't have to make it up. The second case is for the person that has that special situation, that they, for example, have incontinence of urine, which is the urine constantly dripping out of them. In that case, that person, did enough time pass for them to do the process that they need to do in order to pray and the prayer? If the answer is yes, then they have to make it up. If the answer is no, they don't have to make it up. But then the author said, if the inhibitive matter from being obligated to pray terminates and there was enough time left of the prayer time to say Allahu Akbar, that is the duration it takes a person to say Allahu Akbar, or longer than that, not less, is left before the time of the prayer ends, then one must make up that prayer and the one before it if they are combinable in the case of an excuse. So now, after talking about the thing that prevents one from praying happening to you when the prayer is in, now we're talking about that case, that thing that is preventing you from praying, leaving you. So once that thing that you had that prevents you from praying, now it leaves, it's gone. So the person who was insane now, he becomes sane. The one who was in the coma, he woke up from the coma. The woman who was on her period ended. Now, what is the case of that time when that thing leaves? So let's take the case of the woman who was on her period. Her period stopped and there is 5 minutes left. Let's say 30 seconds left in the Maghrib time. So in that case, since her period ended, and there was enough time at least for her to say Allahu Akbar, and in that exact term, then that means she has to pray that prayer that she's in. So even though she won't have time to do the whole prayer in that 30 seconds, but because when her period ended, there was enough time for her to say at least Allahu Akbar, then she has to pray that prayer. If there was only 1 second left, let's say half a second left in the prayer time, and her period ended, then she doesn't have to pray that prayer. Because it's not enough time to say Allahu Akbar. So same thing if the man, he was insane, he had lost his mind, he was in a coma, and then he woke up from the coma and there was 30 seconds left in the Maghrib time, then he has to pray that. He has to pray Maghrib. Because there's enough time in that 30 seconds for him to say Allahu Akbar. Now in that case, if that prayer time that they were in, if the prayer time before it is combinable due to an excuse, then that prayer also has to be made up. So in the example that we gave, Maghrib, can let's say the traveler that's traveling a certain distance called the shortening distance, can that traveler combine Asr and Maghrib? Who knows? Pop quiz. If the traveler is traveling the shortening travel, can they combine Asr and Maghrib? The answer is no. Which are the two prayers that can be combined? Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. So in the case of Maghrib, if he woke up from the coma 5 seconds before Maghrib is over, that's enough time to say Allahu Akbar, right? Yes. So that means he has to pray Maghrib. Does he have to pray Asr before that? No. The Asr that was before that? No. Why? Because they're not combinable. But in the case where he woke up from the coma when there was 5 seconds left to pray Isha, and in the Isha prayer time was 5 seconds away from ending, and that's enough time to say Allahu Akbar. Yes, yes. So he has to pray Isha and Maghrib because they're normally combinable, and with an excuse. Right, so that's what the author is going to say here. Hence, if the inhibitive matter, such as menses or others, terminates before sunset, while there is enough time to say Allahu Akbar, then both Asr and Dhuhr must be prayed, since they are combinable for an excuse. Likewise, if it, that is the inhibitive matter, terminates before dawn prayer time begins, while there is enough time or longer than that to say Allahu Akbar, then both Isha and Maghrib must be prayed, because they are combinable for an excuse. So that's like what we explained. But now we move on to obligations of the guardian. It is obligatory as a communal obligation upon the guardian of the children, boys and girls, who are mumayyiz, that is, the child who has the capacity to reason and discern, and understands when addressed and responds adequately, to order them to perform prayer, even the make-up prayer, in a serious manner, indicating to the child the importance of the prayer, and to teach them the rules pertaining to the prayer after they have completed 7 lunar years of age. So, in Islam, the accountable person is responsible. So in Islam, the concept of accountability is an important concept, which is once the person is accountable, then that means what? When the person becomes accountable, what does it mean? It means that they're going to be questioned for everything that they do by their own will. And so every willful action, the accountable person is going to be judged for it. What does willful mean? It means that it wasn't, let's say, you talking in your sleep. When you're asleep, you don't have any control. You're just asleep. Let's say it's cold and you're shivering, you can't control it. You're not judged for that. You're not accountable for that. Let's say you meant to say up, but instead you said down. You're not accountable for that. I'm talking about what we're accountable for, what we're going to be questioned about, is every single decision that you made. Like when you're walking, right? You're walking. That's a voluntary action. So every single step that you're taking, you're going to be judged for that step. And in the sense of, where are you going? Are you going towards something good? And if the answer is yes, then or you have a sincere intention. If the answer is yes, then you get reward for each step. If the thing that you're walking towards is forbidden, then for each step you get a sin. Well, whatever you speak with your tongue, when it's with your own will, not like a slip of the tongue, not sleep talking, with your own will, every single word that you say, if it's a good word and you say it with sincerity, then you get reward. But if it's a sinful word, then you get a sin for each time that you say that word, for each word that you say. Every single action, including your thoughts. So are you, let's say, looking at the opposite gender in a lustful way, and are you picturing them in like this or like that in your head? Are you fantasizing about them? If so, then you'll be judged for that, etc. So every single second of every single moment of your life where you're doing your voluntary actions, that's being recorded by the two angels, and on Judgment Day, you will see your book of deeds. So the individual is going to be judged for all of that. So number one, and that tells us how serious accountability is, because it's your own book. It's not like somebody else's. You're not going to be judged for what somebody else did. You're not going to be punished for somebody else's stuff. You're going to be punished for what you're responsible for what you are accountable for. That on its own shows you the seriousness of that. And here in the context of having children, it's even more. Because now, it's not just you have to be responsible for yourself, now you have to be responsible for the children. So if they are at the age of mental discrimination, which is mumayyiz, the guardian, which is the mother, the father, the grandfather, the grandmother, and these are considered the guardians of the child, they are obligated to teach the child how to pray, how to fast, the correct creed, how to make wudu, how to make ghusl, teaching them lying is forbidden, murder is forbidden, gossip is forbidden, alcohol is forbidden, pig is forbidden. From 7 years old, around 7 is when it happens, 7 lunar years. At that age. So the parent has to do what? And he has to make sure that the child learns those things. And he's obligated to order the child to pray. Now the child himself is not accountable. And if the child, for example, tells their parent, okay, I'm going to go pray, and then they go in the room, and then they hide for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and then they come out, and and the parent tells him, did you pray? And the kid says yes, but he's lying, he gets no sin. Because he's a kid. He's prepubescent, he's not accountable. But as a guardian, we're obligated to order them. So this is something important. And the one who doesn't do that, the parent, the guardian that neglects that obligation and that doesn't fulfill that right towards their Muslim child, they will regret. They will regret. Your Muslim child would usually grow up to be someone who follows their inclinations and in their evil inclinations, and the one who has the habit of following their evil inclinations, their final destination usually is hell. Many parents nowadays, they only care about treating their children like a pet. You have a pet cat, you pour food in the bowl, you pour water in the bowl, you make sure it has litter so it has somewhere to use the bathroom, you make sure that it doesn't, say, that it has shelter, and that's it. Treating the human, the Muslim child, like a pet, meaning only being concerned with what they eat and where they sleep and what they wear, that is a formula for disaster. So, though the parent, the Muslim parent, he has to keep in mind that he's responsible. Now, if the Muslim parent, he doesn't have the knowledge or the ability or the whatever. You know, some Muslim parents, they're lazy. They put themselves first. They need to be comfortable instead of, sacrificing for their children. Some Muslim parents are like this. It's a shame, of course, but it is what it is. But if that's their case, then they can get someone else to do it for them. So they can tell, a Muslim teacher to say, hey, teach my children. And that's, for example, if they send their kids to a proper Islamic school, that will take care of them. They don't have the ability or the inclination or the know-how or whatever to teach their Muslim children. So they send them to a proper Islamic school so that they can learn. And at least that will be taken care of for them. Now the rest, of course, to love your children and to nurture them and to be there for them and to care for them and to lead by example and to be healthy emotionally and not be part of a toxic environment and all that. Nobody can do that for you. No, nobody else can do that for you. You got to do that on your own. And to teach them the rules pertaining to the prayer for them to please them. Okay, now, however, if the child becomes mumayyiz before completing 7 lunar years, it is not an obligation to order the child to pray. Some children, they're smart, they're sharp. At 4 years old, maybe they might become mumayyiz. At 5 years old, maybe they might become mumayyiz. At 6 lunar years, they might become mumayyiz. If it's before the 7 lunar years and they become mumayyiz, it's good to order them to pray. It's good to capitalize on that sharp mind at that early age. But the guardian is not obligated to order their mumayyiz, non-7-year-old to pray. So the condition in order for it to be an obligation upon the guardian is the child reach 7 lunar years of age and they're mumayyiz. If they become mumayyiz before 7 lunar years of age, the guardian is not obligated to order them to pray. The same is done in the case of fasting if the child can bear fasting. That is, the guardian is obligated to order the child to fast at 7 and hit him for not fasting while able at 10. However, if the child cannot bear fasting, then he is not ordered to do so. So in the case of the fasting, the same judgment as the prayer applies. At 7 years of age, the guardian is obligated to order their child to fast if they can bear the fasting, meaning if their body can physically handle it. Some kids are weak and frail. So and if they fast, they might faint. They might get harmed. So the guardian is not obligated to order them to fast. What we mentioned about hitting the child at the age of 10, if they are ordered by their parent, by their guardian, to pray, they don't pray. I know that now we live in a time where people, they have a messed up way of thinking, and they have their standards backwards. The things that are good and that should be done, they attack and they say that they shouldn't be done. But the things that should not be done, those are the things that they want to push people to do. Now we'll do that. But when we talk about hitting, it's not abuse. It's not a grown adult striking a 10-year-old with their full force over and over, taking out their frustration and their anger on them. No, this is not what we're talking about. Many people might have that horrific type of image and that horrific type of thing in their mind, or pops into their mind when this is mentioned, but that's because of any corruption of society and the toxicity of society and what they've been exposed to. But when we say hitting, it doesn't mean abusing. And in Islam, there's rules for the hitting that is based on discipline. Because there's certain, like for example, we discipline our children. So in this case, for example, we don't hit them because they accidentally spilled a cup of milk. You know what I mean? We don't in Islam, Islam doesn't order you to spank your child if by accident they tipped over their bowl of cereal and now there's Cheerios on the floor. No, we don't do that. That's something. The non-Muslims, that's what they do. If the child trips and falls and, like I said, breaks a glass, that kid might get the belt. That's just horrible. But anyway, the point is, this 10-year-old, if his Muslim parents order him to pray and he doesn't, then the parent is obligated to hit him with the condition that he doesn't hit any of his fatal spots. There's certain spots on the body, if you hit them hard enough, the person will die. Like the base of the skull. You hit someone in the back of the head hard enough, whether with your fist or with your foot or with a blunt object, they're gone. They're going to die. That's why sometimes when people get into arguments on the street and, one pushes another and then one of them just punches another one, like he surprise punches him, and that person, and because he wasn't expecting it, he'll get knocked out and then he'll fall back, and if he lands a certain way on the concrete, that's it, he's done. And then you're catching a manslaughter charge if you're the first one to throw the punch. Because he's dead now. Because he landed on the base of the skull, he's gone. So these are the fatal spots. It's forbidden to hit when we're talking about the discipline, the Islamic discipline, it's forbidden to hit in those spots. Like the base of the skull, it's forbidden to hit the face. In Islam, it's forbidden to slap your own child on the face. Allahu Akbar. It's forbidden. Whether it's the mother, whether it's the father, whether it's the grandmother, whether it's the grandfather, no Muslim can slap another Muslim in the face. Period. Also, the hitting can't be in a way that harms the body. So they can't break their bones, they can't cripple them, they can't maim them. Sometimes you hit someone and then now, they walk with a limp, for example. You hit someone hard enough on their hand becomes limp and they can't move it anymore. For example, this is forbidden. And with the condition that the hitting will have the desired effect. Because some kids, even if you hit them, they're still not going to do what you say. So then in that case, you can't hit them. Some kids, if you do discipline them properly, in the Islamic proper way, they will obey and they will stop doing that thing. For example, they'll start to pray. But some kids, even if you hit them, they're not gonna do what you say. So in that case, it's forbidden to hit them. So it's not abuse. It's not like how the non-Muslims, how they treat their children. In Islam, abuse is forbidden. And it's even forbidden to slap an animal in the face. To slap an animal in the face. In Islam, it's forbidden. These non-Muslims, they abuse animals. SubhanAllah. It is also an obligation upon the guardian to teach the Umayyad's children, males and females, the fundamental and essential matters of the belief, such as the existence of Allah, His oneness, that He does not resemble His creation, and that He is not a body. This is the most important thing. For the guardian to be sure that he teaches his children the correct creed about God, this is the most important thing. Because as long as the individual, as long as the person is a Muslim, he has the correct belief in God, no matter what happens throughout his life, and as long as he dies as a Muslim, he's guaranteed to enter paradise. Whether that is after going through hell, literally, or by being forgiven. Because the Muslim who, let's say, he committed sins in this life, and he died without repenting, that Muslim who died with sins, it's possible that God will forgive him, and it's possible that God will punish him. It's possible. So the Muslim, he has that 50-50 situation in the afterlife. The Muslim. The reason that that Muslim has that 50-50 chance in the afterlife, if he died with sins, if he was a sinner, is because of the creed. Because of the virtue of what he believes. Because of the merit and the status and the value of having the correct belief in God and His messenger. And this is why we, as an organization, as a team, and as like-minded Muslims, we emphasize this matter. We emphasize the creed over everything because the creed is what gets you into paradise. The one who doesn't have the correct creed, he has nothing. Even if he had $1 trillion, he has nothing. Because even if he dies on a pile of gold, but if he had the incorrect creed, what's going to happen after he dies? He's going to go to hell forever. And if he was accountable. And if there's a Muslim who dies on a pile of garbage, what's he going to get in the hereafter eventually? Let's say even if he wasn't a pious Muslim, what is that Muslim going to get in the hereafter? Eventually, he's going to get paradise, which is better than anything in this world times 10. Paradise is greater and better than everything, than this whole entire world times 10. And paradise lasts forever. And whatever you live for in this world, whatever it is you experience in this world, whether you had luxury or wealth, or whether you had prestige or fame, right? Whatever it is that you have in this world, all of it is temporary. So if it's what people consider to be what people consider to be a desirable situation, right? Like let's say, you're good looking and you have a nice body and you have money and you have popularity and you have this and that. But all the people in the world, the people of the dunya, what they consider to be desirable, what they consider to want, that others like treat them like a celebrity, etc. Even if the person had that, from the moment that they're born until the moment that they die, still, it's over once you die. Once you die, what's going to happen? You're going to get buried in the ground. And the only thing that you're going to have after you die, the only thing that goes with you after you die is what? Is your deeds. So that's why it's in your best interest. And if you, let's say, if you want to say, you put in yourself first, you care about yourself, then what you do is you make sure that after you die, you have one of the best situations. And you make sure that you put in the work now, that you do what you need to do now to make sure that after you die, when you get buried in the grave, that your grave is going to be expanded. That your grave is going to be illuminated. That your grave is going to be full with an aromatic fragrance. Because that's among the reward. Instead of the grave being a pit of hell for the one who disobeyed and indulged in their evil desires while they were alive, their grave can be a garden of paradise for the one who obeyed and did good deeds. So the intelligent one is the one who works for that moment. But anyway, the thing that's going to get you there is the creed. So what does the guardian teach the child? He teaches them these essential matters of Islam, of the creed. He teaches them that Allah exists, and He gives them the mental evidence. And the creed of Islam and the proofs for our creed, you don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to know a bunch of big words with 7 syllables that when you look at them, if you were to read them, you would think that it's a different language, that it's not even English. You would think that these are words that somebody just made up, that they're not real words. But the creed of Islam is not, you don't have to be Einstein to understand it. It's simple. This universe, right, everything that we see around us, has a beginning. And just like me and you, we didn't make ourselves. You didn't make yourself be here. Some people can't even remember, like, the first 2-3 years of their lives. Can you remember when you were 3 years old? Can you remember, like, everything that you did when you were 3 years old? No. Can you remember being, a fetus inside of your mom's belly? No. So you didn't put yourself there. How did you get there? You know that it wasn't you. You know that you didn't make yourself do that. You know that you didn't make yourself a fetus. So the same way that you know that about you, you know that about the universe. So even to a young child, you can tell them this universe has a beginning. And this universe needs a maker. And that maker is Allah. The only one without a beginning. That maker is the creator. The only one without a beginning. A 7-year-old can understand that for sure. My 4-year-old over here can understand that. So, for sure a 7-year-old can. And not only that, that age of the child, from when they're like a toddler until they become like 10, that's the most important time for indoctrination. That's the most important time to have something established in their heart. That's why the non-Muslims and the agents of the shaitan, they target children with the videos and with the things on YouTube and with all of that, and with the movies and all that. They target the children. And toys, they target the children. And with the time for indoctrination is within that time. But so nobody can come and say, oh, that's so complicated. Now and for a 7-year-old, look what the 7-year-olds are doing. Check what they're doing on social media. He has to teach the guardian is obligated to teach that child that Allah is not like us. The Creator does not resemble the creation, and He is not a body. This is very essential. We're not Christians, we're not Jews. We believe that the Creator of the universe is unlike us in any way. So He's not attributed with bodily attributes. Because whatever has bodily attributes, then for sure it's a creation. What's a bodily attribute? Like having a size. What's a bodily attribute? Like having an organ. What's a bodily attribute? Like having emotions. What's a bodily attribute? Like movement. What's a bodily attribute? Like stillness. What's a bodily attribute? Like color. What's a bodily attribute? Change. All those things. Change, color, size, emotions, movement, stillness. They have a beginning. And the Creator of those things has no beginning. It's that simple. You don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to go and read any books that are thicker than a brick. Never. I saw something online recently that made me think that the perception of people is not proper. I don't know if it's propaganda or if it's people made it up or whatever it is, but they said the person with the highest IQ in the world, some Chinaman, I don't know if you've seen it. Supposedly that he has the highest IQ in the world, and he says that Jesus is God. And they're like pumping it, they're pushing it on people's timelines. It's on Twitter, it's on TikTok, it's here, it's there. But you know that when you think that people think that because someone supposedly has a high IQ, that somehow equals to them being guided. So many people with a supposed high IQ are atheists. So you having, for example, being able to say 7-syllable words or do the type of math that includes letters of the alphabet with numbers, that doesn't equal to being on the right path. Just like it's an endowment that a person has, but will they be grateful and thankful for that endowment, or will they be ungrateful with it? Just like someone who is very beautiful. Does that automatically mean that they're guided? That they're the ones who know about God just because they're very beautiful? If someone, let's say, was very wealthy, automatically if they come and say Jesus is God, then automatically that's what validates that statement? If someone could jump really high or run really fast or was really strong, and that's what gives their words credibility? No. What's taken into consideration is arriving at the truth. What's taken into consideration is hitting the truth. So imagine the truth being the target. What's taken into consideration is hitting the truth. Right? What's another example? Let's say it's an archery competition, and one of the competitors comes, and he's got, someone might say, the bow and arrow 5000, and it's super state-of-the-art, fancy bow and arrow, but when he shoots it, he misses the mark. And then the second competitor comes, handmade, wooden, just a string and an arrow, no fancy gimmicks or widgets, no bells and whistles. And he aims and he shoots and he hits the bullseye. What's more important, that he had the bow and arrow 5000 or that he hit the bullseye, So the consideration is given to hitting the truth. The consideration is not given to, let's say, numbers in that sense and in the general sense. We don't say, oh, look at all these people, they're wearing this clothes, so now I have to make it important in my life. No. Is it something that is based on proper principles or not? Oh, look at all these people there, they're jumping off the bridge. Should I do it too? No. Oh, look at all these people there, they want to talk this way, or look this way, or sound this way, or think that this is cool, or think that this is what is good. Is that what's going to make me automatically think that it's good, or that it's something I should do? No. It's got to be based on principle. So that's what this life is all about. It's about hitting the truth. SubhanAllah. The guardian must also teach the children that Muhammad ﷺ is the messenger of Allah, that he was truthful in all that he conveyed from Allah, that he was the last of the prophets, and that he received the Quran from Allah. He also teaches them that Allah created angels and that he will annihilate the earth and what is on it, and that he has created for the obedient slaves or the obedient people a place of residence in which they will live in enjoyment called Al-Jannah, paradise, and for the Kafirs a place of residence in which they will live in torment called An-Nar, hell. And the guardians also teach the Umayyad's child the rules of the religion relating to what is obligatory, like the 5 prayers and fasting Ramadan, and what is unlawful, like stealing, lying, even if one is joking, fornication, sodomy, backbiting, and talebearing, and to teach them that using the siwak and the congregational prayer jama'ah are religiously encouraged in other similar matters. You have to teach your child the Islamic values, because having the Islamic values, if each individual has the Islamic values, then what's left between them and implementing it is just action. And then from the action, if each individual does it, then that means society as a whole will be better. But if the person doesn't even know what they are, doesn't even have them, they're completely foreign to him, what are the values that he's going to have? The values of the degenerate people. If you don't instill the Islamic values into your children, then what they're going to have is the values of the degenerate people, of the low lives, of the people that they're inclined to evil and that they do evil, and that they embody all the dispraised characteristics of the human. Greed, vanity, arrogance, dishonesty, betrayal, treachery, because those are the values of the secular world. When you teach the Muslim child the proper values, then hopefully they will have it within themselves that they'll implement.